Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the latest in our series of webcasts, which has become an isolation series in the current crisis. We're talking today about digitizing risk management and control beyond COVID, learning the lessons we have in the past 4 months and looking at the challenges and responses and how they set us up for the future. So welcome everybody. My name's Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions. I know many of you, so welcome. I'm very pleased to have with us today Hans Van Ness, who's Chief Operating Officer here at Consider Solutions, who has a great deal of experience in the topic and leads our practices around these issues. Welcome, Hans.
Thank you, Dan.
So we have people who are on this webcast from North America, South America, Europe, UK, and Asia. And I know for some of you it's very late in the evening and some of you it's very early in the morning, so thank you for giving up your time for this. This is going to be a 45-minute session and we plan to answer your questions in that time as well. For those of you who don't know Consider Solutions, I know many of you do, this is kind of our perspective on the world. It's just so you understand the way in which we're approaching this. We kind of look at this from point of view of how to drive world-class finance and operations in global businesses, which is really summarized by the items on the left, helping drive better business results, reduce the cost of finance and operations, optimize cash flow, and have better risk management. And we deliver that through the pillars on the right. So we're very much talking about financial control and compliance for sure, also broader risk management, and this idea of process transformation. How do we change the process we operate by eliminate the waste and really drive greater end-to-end transparency? And we are in very good company. So these are some of the companies we work with and give us, who challenge us really to come up with smarter ways and better ways to respond to the challenges of the day, and also encourage us to put on, be a bit more thought-provoking in these webcasts we run. So I know many of you are on here today, so thank you, and many others, so thank you all. This webcast is kind of part of a series. We're looking at risk management, both in terms of the result of COVID, but also what's been going on for the past couple of years is this new kind of post-modern technology landscape, which people refer to, and you could regard that as kind of cloud ERP centric, but it doesn't really, a lot of the lessons we've learned apply to all architectures, but it is about what we've learned through COVID. So in many ways, this draws on the experiences on the webcast with Dr. Herman Schuster, the Chief Digital Officer at Lanxeo, lessons for their S4HANA enabled transformation journey, also learning on or bringing on the experiences of what we learned from Jennifer Getman at Starbucks, leading financial governance and control there, streamlining financial risk management control, and also the most recent webcast about the heightened business risks associated with user access as a result of COVID. So this is bringing together a lot of that, looking at how we accelerate our digitization. So I'm here to introduce and also talk a little bit about the need for speed and the need for agility and the need for digital connectivity. And I'm going to hand over to Hans to talk a little bit about the new risk and controls landscape and this idea of accelerating the digitization of risk management and control. And we're going to talk about this idea of the sprint, and I'm going to come back at the end with lessons learned and thoughts for the road. We do have a Q&A session, so I do encourage you to ask questions as we go through. There is a Q&A panel on your GoToWebinar interface on your phone or your computer. As you go through, anything comes to your mind, anything not clear, pop in a question in the interface and we'll endeavor to answer it at the end. If we don't have time to answer here and now, we will answer by email. So and if it becomes irrelevant, doesn't matter, we can deal with that at the end. But ask the questions as you go through because it makes it more collaborative and also gives us more guidance about where we're not answering or addressing the points clearly enough. If you have any technical problems, use the same interface and one of our team will get to you and help you out there. So we'll see how we get on. So we have got a few polls for you to keep you engaged, awake, and participating. They're all anonymous, but they help you understand a little bit about the people you're sharing this event with, and also help you interpret some of the results from the other polls. So this first one is very simple. How would you describe your own role? Would you say primarily, number one, your financial control, internal control person, number two, information security person, number three, a broader IS person in the CIO function, ERP applications, broader IS, four, audit, or five, another? It's how you define yourself. It's not your job title. So if you just want to respond to that, and then we'll be able to see who we, the broad community we have here. As I say, it's anonymous. Nobody's going to know it's you personally. Let's have a look at that. It should be fairly straightforward. It's how you define your own role. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. So we have 46% of you in financial controls, internal controls. We have about 28% in audit, 23% in other, and a small number in broader IS. And nobody in information security role. Okay, that's interesting. So thank you for that. So I want to talk a little bit about the need for speed, need for agility, and need for digital connectivity. Now, these things have been developing over time, but in calmer times, even a year ago, even 6 months ago, if we wanted to look at how we should behave in the future, what actions we should take, we'd look back and say what worked well, and let's do more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. We'd kind of look in the rearview mirror, and in calm times that works quite well. But I would argue, and I think we've probably all learned in the past 4 months, that you can't do that anymore. And if you think that the current, these 4 months are a little aberration, we'll go back to the way it was, that's clearly not the case. We're going to be in this for a while longer. So we're in dynamic times, and this demands greater agility, more ability to detect what's going on around us, understanding that events aren't what we expected, and how to respond. So this idea of being much, much more connected to the dynamic events rather than just responding to what we believe risks were last year. And of course, the other part of this is, we had 6 months ago, everything was doing what it was doing. And then 4 months ago, this happened. And we implemented our business continuity plans. A lot of things changed. We had the business continuity plans covered some things. We didn't cover everything. That interfered with our end-to-end processes. It created new risks we weren't aware of. We had changes which were unprecedented. The way in which our end-to-end processes and controls operated, had to change on a sixpence, had to change very, very quickly. And of course, everyone you talk to says that, fraud attempts have massively spiked, 5 or 10 times what they were before. And most organizations are managing to defend from them, but there's still quite a lot going on. And in the midst of all this, we've also got to manage our compliance. We've got to demonstrate to our stakeholders and shareholders that we're running an effective business in control of its finances and assets. And of course, what's unusual about this experience is it's not just an economic downturn. For the first time, we've closed down all our office premises. So the remote working model has really changed everything. I mean, we have things that we thought would work okay, no longer do. So this mandate for digitization is absolutely essential. We all know what we had to do to be able to make our processes work when we're all working from home. So these are just some of the obvious impacts, both on our operational processes, but also on risk management. So I think there's never been a better time for us to get organizationally fit, to get ready from a process point of view, from a business point of view. And this kind of fitness is about developing stamina, strength, agility, control, and speed. And one thing that's great is in the past 4 months, we've all demonstrated that. We've managed to do things at speed we would never have believed possible in normal environments. So we've definitely proven we've got the energy and the ability to do things that are pretty dramatic. So that's one thing we want to bear in mind. So clearly, as an output of all of this, I mean, speed and agility in themselves tell us that we're not interested anymore in long and winding roads to deliver very rigid outcomes. We're interested in rapid response that deliver flexible outcomes, adaptive outcomes. And what that means from a risk point of view is it's got to be more awareness driven rather than prescriptive. We've got to understand the interconnections, and we've got to be adaptive to changing business conditions. Process-wise, I think that was already going through a shift already, but the idea of compliance being the end goal, really we're moving much more from a compliance outcome to a better risk management outcome, making the business more effective and efficient in delivering its outcomes. This idea of empowering the first line, the operational managers in the business, people actually touch the customer, touch the product, touch the value we deliver as an organization, rather than just focusing on the control oversight. And obviously this idea of minimizing overhead and duplication is pretty clear. And so in terms of how we solve those problems, it's all about rapid time to value, agile delivery, agile response, and the fact we can have an inbuilt continuous improvement process. So I think that's kind of pretty key. And I would suspect that reflects most people's experiences, because what we have learned and what we've demonstrated we can do has really raised the bar on what's expected for us for the future. So that's all very well, but there's some big change impediments as well. Let's just talk through those 5, and then we'll get into the meat of the proceedings. So change impediments. So first one is the scope. So when you consider the fact we used to be a little bit compliance oriented, which is about reporting, about demonstrating what is compliant, and moving more to a broader end-to-end risk management focus, it means we're covering the end-to-end process from risk identification, assessment of risk, through monitoring, mitigation, through to management, making decisions on an operational basis. And there's all sorts of stakeholders involved in that, and that scope is wide. It can be daunting, but this is the reality of business. Like all our other business processes are end-to-end, and being aware of that is an important start point. Then the second big change impediment is the idea of stakeholders. Again, a lot of people are, get a little bit apprehensive about this. Now, this is the 3 lines of management assurance. It used to be called the 3 lines of defense. Just recently, in the past week or so, the Institute of Internal Audit brought out this revision to this model. In principle, it remains the same, but it's all about the fact that the governing body, the board, is ultimately responsible for our achievement of objectives. And the first line on the left-hand side, of people running the business, executing business activities, have got to manage risk in a dynamic world. That we know. The second line is those people responsible for defining, managing, monitoring the policies and processes, the internal controls, financial controls people, information security, all those folks. And the third line is the independent assurance provided by audit. Now, the good news about this updated approach to 3 lines is it's a bit more focused on collaboration. It's more focused on the first line as well as the second line and third line. It's definitely focused on risk and opportunity, which is why the word defense has gone. It's about managing business risk, is about creating business results, driving performance, as well as managing and preventing threats hurting us. And the other key point, which we definitely subscribe to, is this idea of enabling risk-informed decision-making. Risk isn't a static thing. We have to take decisions every day in the front line of business, which include managing risk. So that's the second big change impediment. Making sure we understand who the stakeholders are and engaging them and getting them on board. Third one is the issue of impact. We're covering a broad range here of business activities. Now, internal controls over financial reporting, which is a prime focus for many of you, it comes, this is a great picture from COVID. It kind of links the big picture about the financial statement, that ICFR is about making sure the financial statement is an accurate reflection of business operations, balance sheet, income statement, cash flow, and so on, and how that gets sourced from the results of key business processes, the revenue, the cost, the balance sheet close, all that stuff, and how that's sourced from financial applications and how that sits on the IT infrastructure. And the fact that we have IT general controls on the left-hand side, making sure that our IT environment is solid. But on the right-hand side, the key business controls related to ensuring accuracy, completeness, authorization, and that duties are properly segregated. So I think this scope of impact is an important picture to bear in mind. And again, sometimes it's daunting. It shouldn't be as daunting as it appears, but this is what we're trying to do. The next one is complexity. So, and this relates to my earlier comments about, we've lived for probably 15, 20 years with this belief that there's one big monolithic ERP system which is going to manage all the business operations of the entity. But in reality, that's never really worked out. And the new world which has been coming through in the past 5 years is this hub and spoke reality, often centered on a cloud ERP like SAP's S4HANA or Oracle Cloud and many others. But that central ERP at the center, but satellite applications that are process specific around the piece. So very, very focused on best in class for individual process applications. And that changes our thinking quite a lot with regard to risk, because it means all processes operate across multiple systems, or risks are supported by multiple systems. So immediately you've not got a single monolithic view of how those risks are embedded in our systems and technology. So that is important to bear in mind, because if you're not in this hub and spoke reality yet, although most people are already in there to some level, you're definitely going there, because if nothing else, the ERP vendors are forcing you there. And the fifth big impediment is this idea of misconceptions. I mean, there's a lot of concerns, a lot of questions brought up that, some people feel, we're managing compliance, we're doing well. Well, compliance reporting is just one risk management outcome. It's not there's more involved. It's about effectiveness, efficiency of business, this idea of risk-informed decision-making, and this idea in the new architectures, if we focus on our core ERP, we're not covering all our processes. This idea of material weaknesses, although it's a big driver for executive attention, we can't just be focused on those. I mean, your external auditors will typically focus on certain key themes each year. That's a way in which they operate and they rotate them. But our research indicates there's a whole bunch of serious exposures in most large businesses. And if you're hoping that the implementation of your new technology architecture is going to solve the problem, I think that the issue is to think again. What we're seeing is you need to get your risk and control in hand before you start that implementation, because otherwise it gets very complicated, and your process issues and risks still need managing as you go through the process. So that's 5 misconceptions. I would ask you 2 quick polls before we move into the next section. This is a very simple one. We talked about the hub and spoke. Who's your primary ERP provider? Now, some of you will be obvious one of these. It'll be SAP, Oracle, Microsoft Info, or one other. This GoToWebinar only allows 5 options, so you're going to ask 4 specifics and 1 other. But if you have several of those at primary ERP providers, select all. So this should be pretty straightforward. It's anonymous. Just get a sense of who's in the group. If you want to respond to that, your primary ERP provider that supports your key core processes. Let's have a look at that. Let's see what the answers are there. So no big surprise, 50% SAP, 22% Microsoft, and 24% other. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Oracle, small. Maybe not as many US participants as sometimes, because normally it goes up with more US participants. Okay, thank you very much for that. And one other question on a related topic is, are you as your organization considering an application architecture shift? 1, and this is this whole idea of the Cloud ERP, the hub and spoke model. Yes, we're executing a shift to next generation ERP or this hub and spoke model. 2, we're planning a shift to next generation or hub and spoke. 3, we're considering it, discussing how that might work. 4, it's not in our plans. 5, I don't know. Should only be one of those. It should be quite straightforward. Just interested in your views. So let me know if you don't know. It's number 5. Otherwise, it's 1 to 4. Let's have a look at the results there. So yes, so 17% are actively doing it. Small number. No, this is not in our plans. That's interesting. 47% not in your plans, and 33% don't know. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, that's been my introduction in terms of the need for speed, the need for digitization, and the 5 inhibitors. I'm now going to hand over to Hans to talk to us about both the new risk and controls landscape and this acceleration of digitization for agility. Hans, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. I think you clearly defined the need for change, talking about the complexity that is sometimes unnecessary, the impediments for change. But in order to start change, you have to find some drivers to make that change happen. In many cases, it could be an ERP change, for instance. A lot of the SAP customers on this session are planning or moving or already have been moving from ECC to S/4HANA, and that can be a trigger to look at your risk and compliance situation. And of course, another big trigger that we see is audit observations, the material weaknesses that are, well, the flavor of the year, I could say, are always triggering certain types of projects to look at your risk and control environment. So you need a driver, and that can be different, or it can be a combination of drivers for your own organization. If you go for your new risk and controls landscape, you have to take a stance where you are today. We like to call it the as-is situation, the reality of where you are, who is doing what or not, how the operational processes are really adopted and what their quality is, and how people experience them, good or bad. And of course, what balance that you want to take into the combination of prevention, detection, and attestation. Typically, what we see is that organizations only address prevention or detection or attestation, or just a combination of two of the three. And we really think that you should find a balance in combining the three, because they are augmenting each other and making your risk and control situation more resilient. Your ambition level, or as we would call it, the to-be situation, has to be carefully defined and designed with all the stakeholders that Dan mentioned in his previous slides. Ambition levels that are realistic for the organization, what can be achieved in a short time, and ambition levels that also take into account that you can't resolve 30, 40 years of history in one go, and you have to take an iterative approach for that. If you think about an example of why you move to post-modern ERP in this hub and spoke model, or as many of you say, centralized around a core ERP, you have to keep in mind that why are you moving to that new ERP? Why are you migrating? It is a promise, and I've summarized here some of the promises that we will see with the ERP vendors: simplification, better performance, unification. In all those situations, we can see that if you talk about risk and control, you can apply the same analogy. We are also looking for simplification, for a better performance or value, and certainly for unification, in the sense that all involved stakeholders talk about the same thing, getting reported about the same thing, without confusion or unnecessary work to translate to each other what you have found. So, analogy. If you have thought about moving to a new ERP, you should take the same analogy why you would move to a new risk and control situation. And when you move to a new ERP environment, being it a big migration like within the SAP landscape from ECC to S/4HANA, almost equally complex as moving to a complete new ERP, or you're changing your vendor, you have to take in consideration that there is a big project conundrum. Those projects are massive, multi-year often, largely IT driven, and the shop must keep open for all that time. This is what we observe, and what we also observe, that then the project mantra logically becomes a lift and shift thinking focused one, where you minimize the work and the risk as much as possible. And often we see that risk and control elements are last in line there. Almost I call it the risk and control orphanage in many cases. And even if you don't have the hub and spoke ERP reality, you will run from the situation that you run into garbage in, garbage out like approaches because of the lift and shift. You take your 40-year history with you. And there's a very interesting piece of research by KPMG just came out not long ago, that if you address your risk and control after your ERP migration, your costs will likely be 30 times more to achieve the same result compared to cleaning up first before you migrate. So those are the elements to keep in mind. Having said it all, and taking into account what Dan said about the agility needed, we can't go for the traditional, massive, often compliance-driven risk and compliance projects. We need to go for a balanced risk and control-driven approach. And how do we do that? Well, we have a model that is based on 3 cornerstones. The first one is fact-to-act. So make sure that you define your risks, your policies, up until the action that you do to remediate if risks really have happened. The second cornerstone is the managing plan to results, which we symbolize with our framework, which is saying you have to take a 360-degree look upon the change process for risk and control that you go after. Only one of the 9 segments that we described there talks about technology. The other 8 talk about organizing, understanding, and communication. We think they are as important or even more important than the technology that, in our opinion, should follow. And the last cornerstone is the sprints to value, the deployment of those in a balanced way, in an agile way, and in a release-based fashion. And I will go into that in a bit more detail. We think it is eminent that you take 3 sprints that you do in a sort of staggered approach, focusing on both prevention, detection, and attestation elements in your risk and compliance approach. We think that those sprints should be short and sweet, a month per sprint. Of course, a bit dependent on the size of your organization, the scope, the complexity of your landscape, and the availability of your resources. And you should, from the start, design this as a process, not as a project, because after you go live in the first sprints, you will gather feedback, you will see little omissions, you see potential improvements, which we will talk about a bit later, and you start planning your next wave, your next iteration. But you can be up and running in a very short time if you take this very, very focused approach. And what do you get in those sprints? Well, in the prevention sprint, of course, your controls framework. What should people be able to do? Both the type of controls that you design, but also the access provisioning part. And this is all under the motto of what you prevent from day one that you implement it keeps clean automatically. The second sprint around detection, there you focus on what did they do with all the access that we gave them, all those beautiful users that we have. Detect and act. It doesn't make sense to analyze process exceptions or potential fraud elements if you don't have clear ownership who will address that in a timely and effective way. So you move towards the continuous monitoring elements that we all know from literature. And last but not least, the attestation sprint, very important. It is still required. We have to make sure that what we have given authorization-wise to people is still required and still valid and still needed. The principle of least privilege is often forgotten when the reality strikes in. So attestation is a strong element there. And of course, we have to recertify our processes on a regular basis. We have to make sure that our policies are fit for the purpose, that we still focus on the risk that the process owners, the business process owners, deem to be important enough to monitor, etc. So it's a controlling cycle to make sure that also those elements are certified on a regular basis. And the outcome, yeah, this is just an example of results from 3 sprints, from dashboard to object or violation of exception, and from policy to policy verification. All those elements are in there, and they will help all the involved stakeholders to do their jobs. While doing this, you will hit roadblocks. They will be there. Some you will know upfront, and you can maybe try to do something about them upfront, but not all of them are predictable. We have listed here quite a number of elements that can hinder you to have this agile sprint model working. And you have to try to bypass them by being very clear in your communication, but also you need very clear management sponsorship. And what we have seen, and then touched upon that, the COVID-19 energy that came out of many organizations could be harnessed to get those roadblocks out of the way and say, come on, let's do it with out-of-the-box solutions first. Let's do this agile thinking and not waterfall, and let's make sure that we have the right resources available to do it all in time and with the expected quality. Luckily, we have input from other organizations on how to address and overcome those roadblocks. And this is a summary of the Starbucks lessons, whereby Starbucks identified ownership and accountability, collaboration and complexity as the 3 most important elements that you have to address to get to a fruitful change process. Ownership and accountability speaks for themselves. We help them to use a process called journeys to get from the as is to the to be situation, making sure that all involved stakeholders understood what we were talking about, what was expected from them, and that also helped to dissect the complexity in such a way that people were willing to join on the change process. And it is a collaboration thing, and in that respect, we are happy that the 3 lines model is fostering collaboration between the 3 lines of defense, and we are getting rid of the stovepipes that we see in that arena often enough. Alongseo, Dr. Herman Schuster used a Peter Drucker phrase to summarize his way how to overcome those roadblocks. Ensure that operational culture does not eat your strategy for breakfast. Meaning, tough decisions, don't moan, let's go, let's make it happen. Yeah, life will not be perfect in the first place, but we rather have a good solution quickly and optimize that later on than to talk forever and don't deliver everything. That is, in fact, the summary of his talk. Okay, so you have done your initial 3 sprints, they are live, and what is next? Well, I said you can't do everything overnight. You have built up that 40 years of history, so you have to do more get clean activities, stay clean activities. For instance, if you're in the SAP world, you will detect during your sprints that your SAP role concept needs really some overhaul. And that is, as you know, technically rather complex, and you can't do that during the sprints. So you have to find them out, what role changes you want, and after the initial sprint, set up a new sprint to address those elements. And of course, stay clean is something that has to be done in parallel. If you don't put additional measures in place to stay clean, you run the risk that for part of your well-designed sprints, you have to redo stuff in time, and that would be absolute waste. And after that, you can keep on improving, simplify, and automate. You can address the remaining impediments that did hinder you or that forced you to take a certain approach and ambition level, and over time try to wash them away. Critical success factors, we summarize them in this generic way. It's not a project what you do undergoing, it's a process that you're setting up, a process of risk and control, continuous improvement elements. It is a 3 lines engagement model. If one of the lines is not working with you, then you lose momentum, you lose traction. And yes, the first line still has to be enabled more than we do today to make sure that they take the ownership of the risk and controls for their processes. Another element that is very important is that process first and technology follows. Too often we see that there is a new idea of a new tool will resolve everything. It will resolve nothing if you leave your processes unchanged. If your processes, if your technology doesn't go hand in hand with your newly designed processes, you will partly fail or at least get suboptimal results. And last but not least, communicate, communicate, communicate with all involved stakeholders. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Hans. That's a great talk through the strategies for accelerating digitization and the sprint approach. So thanks for that. I remind you all to ask your questions. Hans has given you a lot of food for thought there. So put your questions into the GoToWebinar interface, and we'll address those shortly. So yeah, thank you very much for that. So I think what we've learned, I mean, Hans referred not just to the experiences we've had, but also to some webcasts we've run recently with other customers, with the Starbucks, Alangseo, and others, and there's some really important lessons there. And if you can take elements from all of these, and I do encourage you to go back and look at the Starbucks and Alangseo webcasts if you want to see that, or you can email us and we'll give you the links. I think the focus here is, less is more is a big thing. Focus on high risk, a fewer set of controls at high risk, but you focus on engagement and action and getting all of the 3 lines together. That's far more powerful than having a broad approach, which is not effective. I think time box delivery, this idea of these short, sharp sprints, we've a lot of evidence that eliminates scope creep, harnesses the energy. It's a very powerful approach. And clear executive ownership and accountability. Again, executives want speed, they want responsiveness, they want outcomes, and it all kind of helps, as this triumvirate to help achieve the results. I mean, costs always matter, but in the current environment, costs matter more than ever. We've got to do things fast. We know that the money we spend on any one activity can be used for many other things. So lots of you are suffering from COVID-related budget squeezes, budget freezes, and even disappearing acts in the budget. So make sure you're doing something which is short and sharp and is effective in the use of cash and resources. But that's one element of it. But change itself is in itself about time. It's about habits, and habits need to form, and it needs support, and we need to ensure we don't fall back into old ways. And whether you believe habits take 3 weeks or 3 months to form, you need to focus that in your change management. And that's not just people at the front line. It's some people. It's first, it's second, it's third line, it's executive management. We all need to form new habits to drive in the new transform processes. And I think there is a focus on enlightened self-interest. If what we do, people can see has a direct personal benefit, it makes life a lot easier. And this idea of fresh start is very, very easy to believe. There's some kind of instant gratification possibly in sustaining, well, we've got all this legacy, let's just keep that going. but it can be appealing at the front, but it's got a long and costly tail. We've seen it many, many times. Sometimes you do need to just take a fresh, hard look at this and say, no, that old stuff, we're going to start with a fresh, clean sheet of paper, and believe me, it's quicker. This whole lift and shift conversion process, which is often common in the ERP shift, you got to make sure you don't do that from a risk and control perspective, and create momentum, as we've seen there. So those are some key lessons. We've got one final poll for you, and it's kind of a broader question. It's about the whole risk and control landscape. Is it, in your view, is your risk and control landscape fit for future purpose? Not just today's purpose, but the future purpose. And again, this is anonymous, but it's interesting to share views and experiences here. The answer one is yes, we're pretty much future-proof in all dimensions. Two, well, we're concerned about our changing risk and control needs. So that's one element that we're concerned about. Number three is we've got concerns about our risk management control processes. We're not sure we necessarily have very dynamic processes. Four, we've got concerns about risk management control technology. Maybe it's not appropriate for the new hub and spoke world. Maybe it's a bit clunky. Maybe it takes time. Or five, I don't know. I'm not sure. But in this case, you can select all that apply. But clearly, you can't have 1 and 5. And you can't have 2, 3, 4, and 5, but you can work that out for yourselves. So you can have multiple answers. So let's you could, for example, have 2, 3, and 4. But you're either going to have 1, 5, 2, 3, or 4, or 2 and 3, or 3 and 4, or 2 and 4, or 2, 3, 4. So hopefully that hasn't confused you. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at the results. Which one of those? Right. So this, by 60% of you, we have, it's interesting. Processes is the concern for 60% of you. 20% of you are concerned about technology. 20% of you are not sure. Nearly 30% concerned about risk. So this is really interesting. So hopefully you find that some thought-provoking. Nobody feels they're future-proof in all dimensions, which is probably not surprising. Anyway, that's a really interesting result. So thank you for that. So as we come to a conclusion and look to your questions, so do ask those questions. We've got a few minutes to answer the questions. Get them in now. So 3 things to think about. One is ERP. Are you shifting? Is there an upcoming shift in the ERP? Are you moving to Cloud ERP? Are you moving to hub and spoke? Is that creating a catalyst, or has it created a catalyst for you to act? Is that strategy clear? And do you really want, can you afford to live with the last 20 years of legacy? So that's one question. Second question is COVID. COVID has been a problem, but it's created so many opportunities and demonstrated what we're capable of doing. So what we're seeing now as a new normal in terms of the agility and speed required, is that challenging your risk management control thinking? Has it exposed your process weakness? Has it exposed dead wood? Do you think your prevention versus detection ratio in controls is right? And the last one, which is interesting, particularly right now, is, are there smart ways to fund doing this? Are there other initiatives that can free up cash? Bear in mind, this is a great quote. It's not mine. I think it came from Walmart. Elimination is the best form of automation. It's the stuff we can get rid of that saves us money and gets rid of redundant activity. And the third one is, do you have a smart cost relief strategy? And I don't have time to go into it now, but there are proven mechanisms here. And if this is something you're interested in, we did a webcast recently with the Associated British Ports. If you want to know how to get access, send me an email at the end. But this is a way of getting cost relief out of other areas of the balance sheet to be able to support some critical projects. So that's worth thinking about. So here's some ideas for you. There's things you can do yourselves. You can benchmark the need for change. You can assess. I mean, you don't need any external help for this. You can work out what's the impact COVID's had on your business processes and risks. Can you identify what's changed? Can you assess the impact of your change in the application landscape on risk, policy, and control? And can you assess the direction of travel in audit comment as a lever for change? I mean, audit comments tend to have a direction for every organization. You've probably got some tendencies over recent years, and you've probably got an idea where it's going. And then in terms of executing on change, assess what options we have to digitize this stuff, both in terms of risk management, control execution, and control monitoring. And get clean before we migrate our process and applications. You heard Hans and the KPMG research that says it's 30 times more expensive to do it late than it is to do it early. And then you can just get in and digitize your prevention, the detection, and attestation sprints. Now, all of this, if you want some advice or thoughts or just share ideas, let us know, because this is, we're right in the meat of this for many organizations. So have a think about that. So this is what we talked about. Hope you found it useful. You have got some questions. So we've got a few minutes to answer questions, a very small number of minutes to answer questions. So we're going to do it now. If you haven't answered your questions, if you haven't asked your questions, send us an email now. But I'm going to definitely going to respond to a couple of these because there's some really interesting ones here. One, it says, how has COVID changed our risks? Right. So I think that's challenging me about why I think COVID has changed our risks. Well, so my view on that is, we know that COVID has changed our working practices, it's changed our staffing, it's changed remote working, it's changed how we execute our processes, our policies, even how we supervise activities. We've got furloughs, we've got job losses. This is a massive change, and most organizations I've spoken to have found it's exposed weaknesses which were previously hidden in their processes, and risks they weren't aware of, and policies that no longer work effectively, all of those things. So the point, maybe at the core level, business processes are the same, but they're the same as they were. But these changes have highlighted the need for speed, but also the need to have a very, very agile risk understanding and an agile method of changing and adjusting our risk policy and control responses. So that's my view, and I think there's little doubt that has been the case. So hopefully that answers the question. There's some good ones here. That's an interesting one. What's different in your digitization sprints from what we have traditionally done with our GRC tools? Hans, you want to take that one?
Yeah, interesting. Well, what we observed is that most GRC tools have traditionally been focused on either detection or prevention or attestation, or even when they had more capabilities, they were only implemented for one or two of those elements. And we are more and more convinced that the new normal requires an approach that takes all those three modes together in those sprints that we suggest, all deployed rapidly and being modified over time in flight, as to say, to make sure that you have a real risk management solution, and you have this basis for this much wanted risk-informed decision making. So limited use of a tool is a risk in our opinion. And then again, I repeat my question, it's more about processes sometimes than just the tool.
Okay, thanks, Hans. Appreciate that. You've given us some great questions. We've only got time to answer those two. There's a bunch more, but we're a couple of minutes over time, so I'm conscious of being respectful of your time, particularly some of you are ready to go to bed, and some of you probably want your first cup of coffee of the morning. So thank you very much for your time. If you've got other questions, pop us an email. Both Hans and my emails are there in front of you. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you found it useful. Hope at least you've taken a few nuggets away with you to act on, and enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, or night. Thanks very much.
Thank you.